Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. I thought, just to kind of try it out, I wanted to try and see what it would look like if I did a video outside in my shed at night and maybe lit some. Well, it's not a shed. This is actually going to be what the whole inside of this. One of these days, I'll do a tour for you guys. But this is what's going to be my study. I'm going to pull all the siding off on the inside and replace it and turn this into a proper study in a library and with a fireplace and all of that. But for now, it's still just a workshop in Maine. But I thought, let's try something new and let's light some candles and let's see how it looks. Maybe it would look cool and people would think it's neat. I know it's freaking cold. That's for sure. You could probably see my breath. Makes me look all spooky. Where to begin? I was looking through my messages one day, my YouTube comment, the YouTube comment section, and this guy by the name of Don T. Panic chimes in, and he says, "Bear, I'm curious to see what your opinion is on the Sumerian legends and mythology, but I would like to hear an opinion that didn't involve lizard people." And that caught me off guard, and I literally snorted my coffee, which burned so bad. Thank you, Don, for that, by the way. That was just lovely. And so I thought, okay, well, I wanted to try out this new setup, see if I like it, and if it'll work okay for videos. And so I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to do that because it's not a super serious topic and we don't have to get into any real heavy philosophy or symbolism or anything like that. We could just have a visit. So I'm drinking from my horn, my proper Viking horn, and you should have yourself alcoholic beverage too if you want to be a good law-abiding citizen, I suppose. And we'll just have a little chat about Sumer. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not sure that my opinions are going to rock the world, to be honest. So there's there's a lot of ways to look at mythology, but the thing I find most fascinating about Sumer isn't even really the mythology, because I've read a lot of Sumerian myths and they're really cool. It's what fascinates me most is the quasi-religion that's kind of started to develop around it. Which, I don't have any problem with the religion in general. Because I believe in the gods and, I'm an Odinist, if we have to put a label on it, which isn't a great label, but it's the closest I have. So it's not even the fact that there's a religion that's developing around it. It's the fact that the religion that's developing around it is a religion based on an idea that the Sumerian deities were aliens. I find that really interesting. And I know that Don T specifically said, don't talk about reptilians. But if I'm being honest, it's not that I believe that they're aliens or anything like that even, but it's just really fascinating that there's a group of people who would worship an alien. That's the thing I think is interesting. Right. I think that's the part that really makes you want to ask questions, because it's like, it's one thing if something is a god and a divine being and something that's higher than us, and so you want to give, devotion to something like that, some sort of higher principle. It's different. That's one thing. But then there's also the idea that I'm going to worship something that is basically me, but just smarter. That's the part that kind of gets me wondering about stuff. As far as like, so, and that's just from someone who's just, because so much of the mysteries really is just psychology. The part of me that's really interested in the psychology of people and why people do what people do, I find that portion of it super fascinating. I just find it really fascinating that people would basically worship really smart space aliens. And then there's the other part of it, which is if we're dealing with a myth surrounding the creation of man and how man came to be, there's also a really fascinating angle to look at where we're dealing, especially if you're dealing with human psychology. Mark Passio has a really great series on this topic called Cosmic Abandonment, where basically, the space aliens come. Wait, sorry, Don. And so the space aliens come, they do what they do, they create. Okay, let's back up for a second. We got to get some context. The context is this. Basically, in the Sumerian myths, the Sumerian mythology that's been popularized today, which I think is really what Don is talking about. He's not talking about the scholarly journal that's about Enki and Enlil and the, Inanna and Ishtar and all these folks. I don't think he's talking about that. I kind of suspect Don didn't say so, but I suspect he's kind of referring to what do I think about the whole phenomena that's kind of surrounding the whole Anunnaki thing. And the way that the person who really brought this to light, that really made this really popular, was a guy by the name of Zecharia Sitchin, who speculated that ancient stories weren't myth, they weren't stories, they were history. And he thought his working thesis was because Sumer was the first civilization to write anything down, they were probably writing about actual historical events rather than something that happened either far in the past or an allegorical tale, which is what most people think of myth as today. And so the way the story goes is that the Sumerian gods came to Earth to mine for gold and then to reseed their own atmosphere. There's something about the properties of gold that they needed. And just to cut out the fat, there was problems getting the gold, and so they created man to mine it for them. Right? That's the short version. They created a race of slaves to get the gold out of the ground. So, the part that I think is fascinating, again, I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying that as a thought experiment, and this is all I'm saying this is just a thought experiment. As a thought experiment, if we're just going to pretend for a second that is true, and that the gods did what they needed to do and then booked it out of here so the gods are gone, it would explain a lot of the ways that humans act. They're kind of in this weird paradigm of, the abandoned child syndrome, where they act out and they cause trouble and they want to rebel against everything their parents stood for. And if you actually read what is there and don't buy the hype, there's a lot of truth to that, because the parents, the Sumerian gods, weren't very nice people at all. And, all their gods were kind of assholes. When you really start to kind of dig down into it, their gods were really horrible, horrible caretakers. They came, they robbed the earth of all its resources. They created a race of slaves. They invented war. They invented currency. They invented religion and all the things, invented government and all the institutions that we hold so dear and are part of a huge power structure that we can't seem to break free from. They're the ones who brought all of that here. And so I don't see the appeal, I guess, is the short answer for that. I just don't see the appeal of the Anunnaki gods as a group of people I want to be associated with. And there's a lot of people who try and suggest that Odin and some of these other Norse gods and the gods of Egypt were all the same group, and I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. I don't think there were some pretty stark differences between. I can't even really say that, because it's, without getting too in the weeds. And I don't know if I can really get it, because I don't know enough about it, and it's too muddled to really make it make any sense. I have like a working idea in my head, but it's not really concrete, and it's not together enough to really be able to articulate it in any way that would make any sense to anybody. It doesn't even really totally make sense to me, because I'm kind of trying to work it out. But one of the things I've noticed, because I've spent a lot of time reading a lot of mythology, is that there is definitely there's two things that myths all seem to kind of have in common. They seem to have a flood story, a rebuilding of civilization, and then there's the war between the gods. Like all the mythological structures have this. And it's really quite an interesting theme to look at. And it's really kind of interesting to look at it as, because different civilizations seem to have aligned with different factions, and depending on who was writing it, would write the other side as the villain, or vice versa. Their side is the heroes, the other side is the villain. I can't remember the fella's name, but they're like in Celtic mythology, for example, you have the Tuatha Dé Danann, who were fighting the Fomorians. And the Fomorians had this formidable god who had one eye. Right. And they hated this guy who they had the one eye. And then the hero was Lu Langfida, which is Lu is light, Lux is light. So we get the word Lucifer and luminous. The Lu is light. And so you have Lu Langfida, who is this, Celtic champion, and he went and killed and destroyed the guy with one eye. And like you could say that, bad, look at, the Fomorians are the bad guys. But then you flip the coin around and you say, well, are they really the bad guys? Because, you have the Tuatha Dé Danann, who are like invading their land and then saying you guys have to get out, and then so you could kind of start to kind of piece some of this stuff together. And then you have like the Greek mythology where the Greeks are, the Greeks fight against the Titans, and the Titans are the bad guys, and the Greeks are the good guys. And so, you could kind of, with some very okay, it's my dog. With some very non-scientific deduction, you can make some educated guesses on which group of gods we're dealing with at any given time. But the people who are really into the Sumerian side of things would say, oh, well, yeah, you see there's two brothers, and Odin is probably Enki, and you have, Zeus, who's probably Enlil, and then their siblings go fight, their children go duke it out. And it doesn't work that cleanly. It doesn't. And that bears a lot of assumptions, and one of the assumptions is that there was only really one group of gods, but two brothers in it, that were here at the same time. Whether you want to call them an actual god or a space alien, it's really up to you. But I think the esotericist, Terence McKenna. I like a lot of Terence McKenna's work. And one of the things he said that really kind of stuck out with me is that the thing about a space alien is that it really wouldn't be alien unless there's something profoundly alien about them. Right? They're not, and there's not really, what am I trying to say? I guess this isn't the right word. It's not the right description, but it's the closest thing I could kind of muster. And so you're going to have to kind of give me some wiggle room on this. It's not esoteric enough. It's too easy. It's too Western sci-fi fantasy. Right? It's too something. And I can't really put my finger on what it is that bothers me about it, but there's something wrong with it. There's something that's missing here that I don't know what the answer is. But as far as dealing with the Anunnaki and dealing with the Sumerian myth as the way I believe, okay, so we just dealt with what people say about it, right? They're space aliens, they've come to get us, there was these two brothers, and they're fighting between gods and all of this. As far as myth goes, the myths are fantastic. They really are really cool. Especially the dying god myths are amazing. One of my favorites is I'm trying to remember, is it Inanna? It might have been Inanna. I get my Sumerian names, my Babylonian names mixed up quite a bit. I feel like it was either Inanna or Ishtar, who had the descent into the underworld. You can't get a more classic dying god myth than you can with that one. That was a fantastic myth. and the whole setup for it, how she ends up dead and a corpse, and how she's raised again from the dead. You know, the stages that she had to go through, all her divine trappings, she was removed from her as she descended into hell. And then when she got to the underworld, she was murdered. And then like her servant came and contacted the divine being on her behalf. And Enki, devised a way to resurrect her. And as she comes out of the underworld, all the trappings of divinity are restored to her. Beautiful myth. Just absolutely fantastic. If you're into myth and you're into mystery school symbolism, that is like one of the best dying god myths you could possibly read. It is, it's perfect. It's a perfect myth. The death of Dumuzi was a really moving one for me. And I one of the things that we do in mystery schools is we there's a, what's the word? One second. Hey, Lily. Lily, come. Oh, good. My dog is still here. That's a good girl. That's my good girl. I let her out, and I was worried that she ran off. We haven't got a fence set up yet. Good girl. What was I saying? We ask, especially with new initiates, we ask the question, what do you want? And then we force the initiate to kind of go through this process of trying to discover what it is that the initiate wants. Which sounds easy on the surface, but it's much harder in practice. And this is something you could do at home, actually, if you really want to know what your life purpose is, or try and do some good self-analysis. Because you would say something like, well, I want power. And I've said this before. We went through this before on other videos. It's like you say, well, I want power. Well, why do you want power? Well, you see, it's because I want to control outcomes. Well, why do you want to control outcomes? Well, and you kind of do this, you kind of just keep asking why. You kind of start to trim the fat, right? Well, it's not really that I want power, because power is really just a means to something else. And why do I want that means? Really, what is that something else anyway? And why do I want it? Well, do you really want that, or is that born out of something else, right? And when I was going through that process, and it's one of those processes that take a lot of work over a long period of time, and you never really arrive at an answer. You're always kind of refining that question for the duration of your career. But one of the things that I landed at in my journey was the feeling towards home. And, I do what I do in trying to get to where I'm going because I want to go home. I have this, and a lot of people have this, where you've always felt homesick no matter where you've been, right? You're always homesick. There's always some place out there that you want to get to. Particularly when I look at the stars. The stars are a major source of that. More specifically, like Orion and Sirius, that star system out there. Ever since I was a little kid, I always felt super homesick when I look at that particular star group. Why? I don't know. There's some fun theories I have with myself, but I don't know why. It just is. So, one of the things I really liked about the Dumuzi story, and like is kind of a strong word. Actually, I should say that one of the things that really struck a chord a little close to home with the Dumuzi story was that one of the things we see when we look at old myths is that the gods raise each other from the dead all the time. They could do that constantly. There is a famous story of when Horus got so angry with his mother Isis that he decapitated her. Charming fellow, Horus. And then the gods raised her back from the dead. So, we see this over and over again. They're always raising gods from the dead. But for some reason, when Dumuzi was killed, they didn't. And instead, they buried him and mourned his death. And there's this really moving line where it says that I'm burying my son in his father's special place, facing the east, so his soul might live forever. And that really, for reasons that I don't know, really resonated with me. And really, there's a feeling that you get when you hear something true. If you pay attention, you'll kind of learn to recognize it. It's like a thrum in the air, right? There's like a pluck of a chord or something that you feel kind of in here. And for some reason, that story kind of thrums inside of me. And that really, like, I would never say that I am Dumuzi, or that I think I am Dumuzi, or that Enki is my father, or any of that kind of stupid nonsense. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that felt a little too true to be comfortable for me, is what I'm saying. So there's a lot of things in those myths that are very definitely worth looking at if you really are interested in myth and you're interested in mystery schools and the symbolism involved with these things, because they're written down and presented on purpose. And that's my belief in it. My belief is that as far as historical literal documents, they're about as historical and literal as the Jesus myth. Right. We could say, for all intents and purposes, we could see that they're true enough. But they're not all the way there. Right? There's they're true in the sense that truth is bigger than what is capable for a man to understand. And I mean man as in like mankind, that kind of descriptor. Humankind, if you want to be socially correct nowadays. The mind of man does not possess the amount of whatever it is that is required to understand the totality of truth. And so truth, you can't get there just by knowing a literal set of facts. You have to get there through story. It's like an abstraction of something. Right? It's an abstraction of something. It's like explaining to a little kid where babies come from by saving him the gory details and explaining to him that it's Legos. Like mommy is putting together Legos inside her tummy and it's building a little baby. Is it true? Well, it's true enough. It's true in the sense that as the child grows and his consciousness expands, he could fill in the gaps as necessary and come to the truth further down the road. But to the mind that is still just a child, and I would say that humans in aggregate, their minds are still very much in their infancies. And I'm not saying that to be mean or to try to puff myself up to say I'm any better, because I'm not any better. But man is still very much as he's always been. He still basically treats himself and the things around him as though he's an animal. And as an animal, it gives him the right to do whatever he wants and without any of the consequences. So that's just kind of my opinion on that. I think they're true. They're true in the sense that a Lego baby is true. We'll say that. And if you paid any attention to my content, you would know that that's my opinion on the Norse gods. You know, in fact, I think you would be kind of hard-pressed to find a heathen or Odinist out there that would make the case that what we're dealing with is something that is that my wife out there? I can't tell. You'd be hard-pressed to find a heathen out there, or Odinist, or this is the Thor version of that, Thorist, who would make the case for a literal interpretation of the Norse myths. I don't think we operate really on that we don't really try and operate on that thing. Like, the Christians, well, not to pick on the Christians, I think the folks of the Abrahamic religions, so Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they make a case of they always try and make a case for the literalness of their belief systems. And I think there was a time when a lot of people argued for the literalness of their belief systems, but they're really, in today's day and age, they're really the only ones who are like saying, no, there was a literal Jesus who literally walked on water, who, had a literal rise from the dead, who literally fed 2,000 people with 4 loaves and 2 fish, and the great tragedy of that is that you miss so much of the beauty of what those myths are really trying to say. You miss all the good stuff because you're so wrapped up in the literalness of their interpretation that you don't get to see all the presents that are left for you. And I worry about that with the Norse community, because the Norse community, in their rush to leave Christianity, has adopted all their mistakes. And instead of encouraging people to see the mystery of it, the mysticism of it, the wonder of it, has instead started to argue the literalness of it. Back when I used this example before, I'm sure of it, that when I was on Facebook ages ago, that you would say, I have this idea. Like, what if the world tree was really this? And people would say, thank you for saying that. Don't say it anymore. That is your own interpretation. It's not a source-backed theory. They even have a term for it. It's called an unverified personal gnosis. And it's like, you hate Christianity so much for doing that to you, and to shoving all that belief down your throat, that you're turning around and doing the exact same thing to the people who would be free from that. And I think that's the great tragedy. And it's a tragedy that keeps on giving, because now we have a group of people who are saying that the Anunnaki are a literal race of literal aliens. Okay. My phone's about to die. that the Anunnaki are a literal race of literal aliens, and that they are going to come back and set things right, or they're super not, or that and they start developing into these little religious fractions all over the place, and it's really quite something else, you know. And so that's my fear, is that, they're going to miss all the goodies, all the beauty in these stories, because they're too focused on where the gold mines are in Africa. Instead of what is the symbol for gold and why is it so important? Why do they travel to Africa to find this symbol? What is the transformational property of gold that they're so obsessed with? Not in a literal sense, but in a metaphysical sense, in the sense of a spirit, in the sense of purity, in the sense of piety, in the sense of worship, in the sense of being something bigger and better than yourself. And it's a real tragedy of that. So I'm going to go ahead and get off. My phone's about to die anyway. Let's have one last drink to us companions, us heathens, out here in the wild wildernesses of Maine and across the US and Europe, and to my friend in South Africa who I know is listening. I love you all. Thank you so much for... it seriously is something quite exciting to have someone care enough to listen. And it really means a lot from the bottom of my heart. I am super humbled by that. Thank you so much. And Don T. Panic, thank you for your awesome comment, man. That really made my day. Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful New Year's, and you don't, that you don't take the myths in such a literal fashion that you can no longer see wonder and mystery anymore. Wonder and mystery are the most wonderful drugs you could ever have, and they're what propel us forward. So, to you, my friends, have a good evening. Bye-bye.